Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Reckless a Talk, our TTRPG interview show, where we sit down with some of our favorite writers, players, GMs, and streamers to get to know a little bit more about what makes them who they are. I am, as always, your host, GM Nathan. I use he, him pronouns, and this week we are extremely excited to present to you a super in-depth, super fun, super insightful, and super timely interview with Brian Flaherty of Many-Sided Media. Brian does lots of things. He frequently GMs, performs, interviews, edits, sound designs, produces, promotes, basically everything that could have to do with actual plays and podcasting. He seems to do it and do it well. He and the rest of the team at Many-Sided Media have exploded over the last year with My First Dungeon, a show with rotating systems and rotating casts. He and co-host Elliot Davis also produced one of my favorite TTRPG interview shows, Talk of the Table. Most recently, Many-Sided Media announced something that might be of interest to Reckless Attack listeners who enjoyed our 100th episode Regency arc, Bitcherton. Bitcherton is a new, improvised, Austin and Bridgerton-inspired comedy show starring comedians Iffy Wadaway, Katie Maravich, Carolyn Page, Alex Songshua, and Brian. In this interview, we cover so much ground, including asking more of yourself, taking wild swings and missing, setting expectations, cheat codes, and the importance of backups, among a great many other things. Truly, this is an incredibly inspiring interview for me as a creator of actual plays, and we both joked afterwards that it felt like we could have kept talking for another 2 hours and still not covered everything. Buckle up. As always, if you enjoy this episode, please go check out some of our other Reckless a Talk interviews and maybe even some of our actual play episodes. We have links to all the things that Brian and I talk about in the show notes, including a link to the Bitcherton Kickstarter, which, if you are listening to this the week it comes out, is live right now. Please go check it and the first episode of Bitcherton now, as well as all the other great stuff Many-Sided Media is putting out. With that, I'll see you next time. Hello, Brian.
Hello, how's it going?
It is going great, and I appreciate your commitment to just like immediately responding as if we hadn't been talking for like 10 minutes before this.
I know how to play the game. You know, I've been there for
exactly.
a little bit.
The illusion is all a part of the experience, but I remain, as I have been for the last 10 minutes, very excited to be here talking to you, Day. Thank you for stopping by here on Reckless to Talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've loved your previous conversations on Reckless to Talk, so I was very excited to get the message that you wanted to have me on because I listen every week.
And I will not be engaging with that because this is not an episode of me being like, oh yeah, I have seen you share it on social media. Tell me all the things you like about this show. But I also appreciate it again, also as a fan of the things that you are doing. So it's just kind of like, we'll be both very cool, very professional, very like, that does sound like an interesting opportunity. I think we would have a lot of things to talk about on Reckless to Talk.
The word synergy came up a lot in our text conversation.
Yes, we did like retch multiple times throughout it, but we still maintained professionalism despite the fact that we are, podcast gremlins in our truest heart of hearts.
Oh yeah.
But hey, for those unlike me who are familiar with the things that you do, could you please tell anyone in the audience who is unawares who you are, where they might know you from, the yada yada bio kind of goodness?
Oh yeah. Hi, I'm Brian Flaherty. I'm a podcast producer, actual play GM, performer, tabletop role-playing game designer, all things tabletop really. And I am one of the co-founders of Many-Sided Media. We currently make the shows My First Dungeon, which is a tabletop role-playing podcast that helps game masters learn new games and make each one better than the last.
Oh God, you could really feel the like rehearsed, this is 12 tight words of copy in a way that I really resonated with my like PR marketing soul.
Our tagline for that show is still too long for me, but I'll find it eventually.
But you said it with the panache needed, I guess.
Exactly.
is the point.
We also have the show Talk at the Table, which is a conversation podcast with me and my co-host Elliot Davis, another co-founder of Many Sided Media, where we talk to the coolest people in the tabletop industry about what is happening in that industry and where it's going. And then we just launched the pilot episode and the Kickstarter for a new show, Bitcherton, which is an improvised Regency podcast, kind of akin to an improvised Bridgerton or Jane Austen, featuring honestly an all-star cast that we don't believe that we got.
A preposterous cast.
Cast includes Katie Maravich, Ife Wadiway, Carolyn Page, Cassie Wilson, Alex Song Shah, and me. And as of time of recording, we've also announced some of our first guests for the season, should it get funded, including Rekha Shankar, Teo Yang, and just announced a few minutes ago as of recording, Nathan Yaffe from Drawfee.
Oh, cool. I was literally going to say, I remember two of them. I will not be surprised if a third name has already ticked over since I checked at like 8 p.m. yesterday or whatever. So that doesn't surprise me, but also only continues to drive interest and excitement for certain. But we'll be talking about all of that. Don't worry, both dear listener and also Brian. We'll talk about all of that.
Excellent.
But that's not how we start. We got to get to the root. We got to, kind of delve deep into the backstory straight up top. So, Brian, where did kind of either tabletop games or just kind of general nerdery, wherever your personal journey best starts in a tale-telling way, when did that kind of start being a part of the things that you were interested in?
Man, I was ready for the where did tabletop start? But if you take it to just general nerdery.
I know. It's always like a weird spectrum for people. So I give people the option of where they want to start.
I feel like I've got to shout out my uncle Tim. When I was like, I don't know, 11 or 12, he gave me a Christmas present. Or no, I must have been a little bit old. I must have been like 16 or something. He gave me a Christmas present and he was kind of like, hey, I have a lot of nieces and nephews. I can't give presents to all of them all the time. So this is kind of like your last big Christmas present from me. And it was a big box filled with like a ton of stuff. And included in it was like the revival of Doctor Who season 1 and 2, all the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books.
Man.
What is that movie? The Lost City? I forget the movie. And then The Prisoner, which is this amazing like 1960s, 1970s BBC spy mystery thriller. It's incredibly weird. And honestly, like that combination of things brought me to my nerd journey. And like that was it. That box of stuff. And I remember when I was a kid, I bought one of the like D&D, I think it was like 3.5 or 4 like orange box set things. I'd heard about D&D and I was like, oh, this sounds cool. And we opened it up and there was a bunch of rules that we weren't going to really read. It was just me and a buddy. And we had no idea how to play it. We were like, what is this? Like, because we had no reference. We had no reference point. So very quickly we didn't play it. Like we kind of tried on a table for probably a couple of hours and just had no point of reference for how to play this thing. And then it wasn't till I moved to New York that I found someone recommended to me The Adventure Zone. And I wasn't a big podcast listener at that point, but I was like, okay, I'll check this out. And I listened to the first couple of episodes. I'm like, this is fun. This is cute. And then there was a certain moment where it like hit me, like I got it.
Yeah.
And I was standing on 23rd Street and 7th Avenue. And it was when Griffin McElroy, who was the GM and the editor, also like added in some sound cues to like make you like really feel a big moment. And I fully remember like stopping on the street being like, holy shit, that just hit. That absolutely hit. And then from there, I kind of discovered Critical Role. And when you listen to some Critical Role, it's still a lot of D&D.
Oh, yeah.
And I listened to all, like when I was running, I'd listen to like episodes while I was running. And very quickly I was like, okay, I got to play some D&D. And I had like 1 or 2 false starts with like small campaigns that it was tough to get a group together. And then I had my first like real group with my 3 buddies, Pat, Nathan Yaffe and Sebastian. And we I think I ran them through 20 sessions of Tomb of Annihilation and then 10 more sessions of a like custom written like post Tomb of Annihilation game where like you get back to Port Nyanzaru and someone else has taken credit for you lifting the death curse. And let me tell you, GMs out there, if you want your players to get invested, have them do some great heroic deed and then have someone else take the credit for it. I've never seen a group of players band together against a common enemy so quickly.
A true galvanizing force of spite and bitterness.
Absolutely. And that was my first D&D group, and it was really great. Like Sebastian made one of our key items for the game was the alchemy jug. Yeah. And the alchemy jug, like there's a bunch of different spouts that like bring out different liquids like water and mayonnaise and all this stuff. And he made an alchemy jug and like brought it to the game. I mean, it was incredibly janky. It was made out of a giant milk carton, but he had like bags of mayonnaise and water and oil and stuff. It was,
damn.
It was just the kind of D&D experience you really hope for.
Of course, yeah. Especially for the first, like, quote unquote, like, real dedicated group is like, oh, after like 20 some sessions, we have someone making props.
Exactly. And then right before the pandemic, I started a new group with a bunch of friends, and we did our session 0 in person. We played one game in person, and then pandemic hit. But, you know, there's nothing to do during lockdown. So we played 52 weeks straight. Like every week, like clockwork, didn't miss a time. Like we didn't even move the time. And it was great. Like we made, I'll show you this. One of our players in like the first session made a joke about an in-word. They're like, oh, can I go to a newsstand? And I was like, yeah, what do you want? They're like, can I get a newspaper? I was like, yeah, sure. And they said, do they have any like literary magazines? And I was like, yeah, tell me, what's it called?
Of course.
And the throwaway line was, oh, it's the New Orker. And I was like, great, you're gonna regret that. And so we made a 30 some page New Yorker with like all in-world stuff, like fully looks like a New York. It's got in-world fiction, like an original game. It's got an original monster.
Yeah, there's like art, there's art everywhere. There's multiple columns of like, text for everything.
Like, tell me, that looks like the New Yorker. We really went to town.
That is preposterous. Like that is, I have long wished that I had like the brain capacity to like be the DM who's like, every few sessions, here's the newspaper or whatever. And like hand people a Word document that is like vaguely looking like sort of a newspaper. That is the New Yorker in fantasy. Like cannot express enough to audio only listeners. Like that was like a glossy magazine, which is preposterous. And I say that with affection.
I mean, like my job at the time, and still kind of is I was working as an assistant director for film and television shoots. So like the logistical side of film and television. But pandemic hits, that industry shut down. Like that industry shut down hard for a while. So I had nothing to do. I was truly sitting on my butt. And I was like, okay, I might as well learn Adobe InDesign. But now I do that as part of, you know, real, like Elliot Davis, my co-host on Talk of the Table, one of the co-founders of Many Sided Media, player in My First Dungeon, current GM for Wildsea, is a game designer who made games like Project Echo, Something's Wrong with the Chickens, and is just coming out with Rom-Com Drama Bomb, which is a 3-player game where 2 people play as leads in a rom-com who don't want to fall in love. And the third person plays a supervillain who has strapped bombs to their chest and is forcing them to enact a romantic comedy.
A classic, you know, take scenario for sure.
It's a classic trope of the genre. And like that was the danger, you know, so many rom-coms have bombs strapped to people's hearts. And so he was a little bit worried going in, like, you know, will I be able to separate myself from the pack? But you know, I think we did a really good job.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, sometimes you're still chasing that, you know, it's like, we play the Alien tabletop role-playing game. You're being in the genre that you know and love, just like bomb-based romance.
Exactly.
It's 1-to-1.
Bomb-based romance, I mean, is so many. I mean, you can name all of your favorites. Like, go ahead, audience, in your mind. Just think of your favorite bomb-based romance.
Yeah, right. We won't name our favorites, but you can name your favorites. So were you and I know this is always a tricky question for someone who says, I want to play tabletop role-playing games, and therefore I need to be the one organizing it, and therefore this probably means I might have to be the dungeon master. But from day one, is that kind of like the role that you took, at least kind of off mic, quote unquote, like as you were going, or is it just, kind of the convenient way to organize a group?
I'm trying to remember back. I think really the answer is because I worked in like logistics and, wrangling, like literally my job is just wrangling 100 people together and like forcing them to stay on schedule day after day after day. I knew pretty quick, like if I want to do this and if I want to do it like right now, I have to be the person. But also at the time I was listening to a lot of Critical Role and Adventure Zone. And I think the job I most was excited about, or like the position at the table, was Game Master, was Dungeon Master. Because I really liked seeing like, how Matt Mercer created a story. I liked seeing how Griffin McElroy like led these people through this. And I especially the balance arc, how Griffin built up this like kind of crazy world, like madcap world that was insane, but also like had a lot of internal logic. It was very fun and had a lot of great Easter eggs to like go back when you were at episode 60 that kind of related back to episode 15, 20.
Was the end of Tomb of Annihilation, was it just like homebrew city from there? Like did you kind of when or did you kind of become a like homebrew centric GM? Because many people just keep running games and kind of put their own spin on pre-written stuff, and like that is a perfectly super valid, super rewarding experience. But kind of did you transition into like, no, all bespoke adventures for me?
Ever since Tomb of Annihilation, I haven't run much D&D in a while, but I think that was the last time I ran a pre-written D&D module, partially because when I was running it, I have trouble with D&D modules just because they're so big and there's so much. I love reading through them because there's a lot of great like tidbits you can take. I think like Wild, the Witchlight? Wild. I
know what you're talking about. Sound off in the comments, podcast listeners.
I've got it on the shelf next to me, but it's the one that is obscured by other things. There are a lot of them where you can like pull little snippets from, but I had a difficult time prepping that way. Whereas when we moved to this like fully bespoke 10 session thing, that came a lot easier and it felt much more off the cuff. And ultimately I had more fun doing it. I think as that first campaign went on, I started adjusting things more and more until I got to the end of it where I was like, okay, yeah, we're doing this whole other thing. We're making these like false gods and people who are claiming to do this and stuff. And it was very fun. And actually, as I've kind of from that point, I think I got in my head a little bit of being a bit snobbish about like, oh, everyone should make their own. You should do your own stuff. It's easier. It's better. But as I've gone on, I've actually found that modules for other role-playing games, I actually like a lot better. They are usually smaller, which is wildly helpful because the D&D module is so huge. And they're kind of laid out a little better for the GM. So like when we played 9 Lives to Valhalla, which is a death metal Viking cat game where every time you roll the dice, something dies. Oh, and also you can kill death and then become death. And death is the game master in the game. It's wild. Go check out 9 Lives to Valhalla by Gem Room Games. It's phenomenal. But they have some great modules that they're like zine sized and they give you all you need. Like we were able to get some great sessions out of just maybe 20 or 30 pages of like a zine digest size thing.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So lockdown is happening 52 weeks D&D all the time. That brings us to 2021, which is a notable year. As someone who has been looking into the timeline of publicly available Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing game things that you have done. So, you're already, like you said, already doing a lot of kind of performance adjacent work and like a lot of stuff in the kind of creative space. And then also running D&D and tabletop role-playing games. So when did all of that converge? Like, do you remember a point where you're like, you know what? I think I want to do a podcast. Think I want to maybe like make a thing out of this as opposed to just kind of continue enjoying this as a personal thing.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by A Foul Light Shines, a new free serial novel based on a D&D campaign. The Empire of Fire and Water has known 20 golden years of peace since the end of Agenion's War. a peace which is now in peril. When a ragtag group of friends intervene in a grotesque monster attack, they're too late to save a wounded man who leaves them with an encrypted journal and the words, "Trust no one, Tyir." Can the gang find Tyir, escape the claws of more strange monsters, and uncover the lurking threat to the Empire before it's too late? This story features themes of found family and strength in diversity, and is available for free on Campfire and Royal Road. A foul light shines. Come for the fantasy. Stay for the cheese-obsessed goblin gunslinger. Dark Dice is a critically acclaimed actual play podcast brought to you by Fool and Scholar Productions. With over 20 awards in sound design, Dark Dice brings its horror-themed campaigns to life with snappy combats, terrifying monsters, and tons of original music. Each episode is only 45 minutes long and features an all-star cast of seasoned role-players and first-time players alike, including folks you might recognize, like Jeff Goldblum, Lily Pichu, and Jasper William Cartwright. Start with Season 1 and follow the adventurers on their quest to investigate a doppelganger, or jump into Season 2 and listen to a new story about a terrible, corrupting sound that infects all who hear it. Dark Dice is available for free however you listen to podcasts or at darkdice.com. So ask yourself, do you seek him?
You know, I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't actually remember what the thought was. Like, I don't remember when it happened.
Yeah.
I don't remember why I was just like, this is definitely a thing I should do. But I think at the time, I was listening to a lot of Adventure Zone. I was listening to Critical Role as a podcast a lot. And it was just a big part of my life, just hours-wise. Like, if you do that for an hour or two a day, it's like, okay, that it's a significant portion of your life.
Yes.
And I just kind of thought like, hey, this is fun. I like doing this. This is another excuse to play more games. I think I want to make something like this and like have some of those moments, especially in Adventure Zone. I think was the one that really like blew my hair back. I hate spoilers. So let's skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want spoilers for Adventure Zone Balance Art.
Yep.
But there's a scene very late in the game where I'll try to keep this not spoilery. A character who is killed very early on in the campaign comes back and is revealed to have kind of been there the whole time. Yep. And I was walking home from the grocery store in Brooklyn, and I truly, this is not hyperbole, I dropped what I was carrying. I was like, I was blown away by it. And I think it was not long after that I decided to try to make a podcast.
Amazing. Yeah. I have heard you kind of talk about moments in fiction that you then remember where you were, what you were doing.
Oh, yeah.
Your exact surroundings, what mood you were in, and then like, oh, this happened, or this joke happened, or this whatever. And my brain chemistry was changed forever. And that is extremely relatable to me for certain. The first thing you did, again, knowing you, of course, were working with a great many other people,
right.
But was the 20-sided podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So going in, what was kind of your vision for what that show was going to kind of look like? And especially, kind of then, now you've launched multiple shows since then, like when you launched, what was kind of important to you and what was the kind of hope and design? And then what does that look like?
So the 20-sided podcast is a D&D podcast that we did 2 seasons. Second season actually never got finished, and it's kind of just the podcast is kind of defunct at this point. We're hoping to get back to it at some point, but we've got so much else on our plate. But it was a podcast that wanted to do very much actually, and I think right as we launched it, I think Zach Oyama announced the Rotating Heroes podcast, and my heart kind of sank because it's kind of the exact thing that I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Short arcs, so like 10 to 15 episodes, but all within the same world. So like we would do an arc in this continent and then an arc over here. And they would slowly large world events would start to cohere. And then you'd have, people jumping back and forth. So the big picture plan was having a almost like Game of Thrones world where each season would be like a perspective chapter from different sections. And as it goes, if anyone listens back to that podcast, you can hear it in real time, me learning how to edit and sound design.
For sure. Yeah.
Because episode 1, and actually this is a story I don't think I've told anyone, but the first 4 episodes or so of 20-sided podcasts we had fully recorded, and I was editing them. I was editing, I think, episode 2 in a cafe in the West Village called Cafe Reggio, where I was editing all the time. And yeah, you're laughing because I talk about Cafe Reggio a bunch in places. Great cafe. And I was editing, and I had not a solid state drive, but like a portable hard drive, but one that has like a spinning disc in it. And I was packing up for the day, and I knocked it on the ground, and it hit. And at that point, I just started. I didn't know about doing backups, so I didn't really think about doing backups. That hard drive hit the ground. My heart fully sank.
Yeah, of course.
I think I'd finished 2 episodes, but like episode 3 and 4 would have been just fully lost. We'd already recorded like 5 and 6 or something. And there was probably 6 hours where it was a coin flip whether or not I would have continued the season or been here talking to you about D&D podcasts.
Whoa. Yikes.
So here's my biggest tip. It's the 3-2-1 rule. You want 3 backups in 2 formats, 1 in a remote location. That's your first investment before a mic is 3 fucking hard drives. I'm not kidding. I'm truly not kidding. It is the most important thing.
You are, you've already kind of described it as like a lot of learning on the go and like figuring out editing, figuring out sound design. And, I'll definitely say kind of, first of all, to set the question up, even though I am not the primary editor for our actual play, I have very specific hopes and dreams of what a like well edited, well sound designed like actual play sounds like. And my first dungeon is certainly kind of very in like the wheelhouse of goodness for me.
Oh, thank you.
So as you kind of threw out your first podcast and kind of then as you're transitioning into my first dungeon and some of your other projects, I guess kind of what did you personally like? How did you develop, I guess, your tastes and develop your techniques and that kind of stuff? Was it just kind of trial and error and like, well, I've listened to 400 hours of podcasts, so I know what I what I like? Or, just kind of like, how did you evolve the sound and kind of like design aspect of things?
So I'd gotten into a bit of audio drama before I listened to any D&D podcast, because I got into Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was famously a radio play before it was a book, and also like an incredibly innovative radio play. So I had fallen in love with that a long time ago. So I had an idea of what things could sound like. I knew like where the bar could be. And hearing the evolution of the Adventure Zone, I started to see the changes of like how invested I got versus like how much additional stuff they added to that. And Griffin does a great job, doesn't add a ton of sound design, but it's a lot done with music. And when I first edited like the first episode of 20-sided podcast, which also the first 2 episodes are a bummer because my audio I misdid the mic. And so it's just computer audio for me and everyone else sounds good, which is a nightmare as well. Again, another reason why I almost didn't finish the podcast.
Yep. But
I had, the 4 speaker tracks, me and the 3 players, like 1 track for music and 1 track for sound effects. Now my minimum is like 25. And that's a good day.
It is nuanced. Yes. Yeah.
But I started by putting in music that just kind of like played in the background. And I liked that. And then at one point or another, my narration for like a GM moment, like kind of built and built and built. And all of a sudden the thing crashes down and I think the audio just happened to swell and hit right then. And I was listening back and I was like, that was it. That was cool. That was magic. That was beautiful. And it's one of those moments where you all of a sudden realize like everyone in Hollywood and anyone who uses music to tell fiction, to tell stories, it's the biggest cheat code in the fucking world. It's such a cheat code. It's so simple. And I mean, music is obviously difficult, but like to manipulate and to enhance and to guide emotions, especially in something that you only have audio to use. Like you can't see my facial expressions. You can't see my gestures. You can't see me getting bigger and my face getting more animated. You have to hear it in my voice, or failing that, you have to be able to hear it some other way. And music was a great way to do that. And kind of once I unlocked that cheat code, you start using it a little more. You find like certain tracks that were like, oh, this track I can do this kind of like trick with. Like all of a sudden I'm moving the audio around a little more to fit the music, because the music has like these great spaces and this great rest that I really want the audience to feel. And you're not like thinking this really like I'm not thinking in my head like, oh, I want the audience to feel this rest.
Right. Yeah. But it's there.
But
like,
but
you're
it's there.
Not thinking it.
It's in the background. It's like, I know what the good version of this sounds like. Let me see if I can make it. Let me see if I can make it. The thing is, when you look at a finished version of a My First Dungeon episode, and we'll on the Many-Sided Media Discord, we'll often do screenings of our episodes, and I'll stream the video of our session so you can see all the sound effects and all the cuts and stuff. And it looks incredibly complicated and large, and it looks like it takes a ton of time, because it does. But ultimately, if you zoom into any section of it, it's incredibly simple. It's just very simple things done thousands of times.
Yes. Yeah. That's a lovely way to put it, I think.
And I mean, that's true with painting or music. Like, every great piece of music is a bunch of single notes, and every painting is just brushstrokes.
Mm-hmm.
The more you do and the more you focus on each of those individual moments being as good as you possibly can, all of a sudden, when you step back, you have something beautiful and better than you thought you could have. And that's a feeling that is addictive.
Yeah, big time.
And so, like, by the end of season 1, getting into season 2 of 20-Sided Podcast, like, I upped my game a lot. And then I think, especially in season 2 of 20-Sided Podcast, you can hear me going from, I don't want to say good to great, but going from improving very deliberately and very rapidly.
That kind of then, for me, transitions a little bit to the other side of the whole podcast making experience that isn't just editing and sound design, the recording and playing of games and making of podcasts. So you have a very interesting structure for 20-Sided Podcast, where it is this kind of not episodic, but like mini arcs, kind of seemingly disconnected stories in different parts of the world, but still kind of very specific. This is, a handful of episodes that we're telling this story. And then you transition to My First Dungeon, which, again, for those who don't know, it is very short form storytelling, handful of episodes, different rotating casts and different rotating systems. But so first of all, that to me is a very interesting and deliberate choice, especially coming from someone who's like, yes, I have now GM'd 100 episodes of the same campaign. And so for both of those, I guess the first question is that kind of contained story. Is that something that is kind of naturally interesting to you? Or is it kind of more podcast focused? And either way, kind of what was the thought process as you were designing both of these podcasts and kind of chasing that angle down as opposed to something else?
So what My First Dungeon is now is not that different, but is pretty different from what it started out as, because there is overlap between the time I was doing 20-Sided Podcasts and My First Dungeon. Mm-hmm. And it was early on, I started listening to a lot of Adventuring Academy, which was College Humor and Brendan Lee Mulligan's like interview podcast. A lot of great conversations.
Definitely.
And I DM'd a lot. I learned a lot. And I wanted to do a show where, like, the idea was episode 1, I teach someone how to GM. Yeah. Episode 2, we do a one shot. And episode 3, we come back and talk about like what went right, what went wrong, and how we can make things even better.
Yeah.
And we played D&D for the first session of the first season. First GM was my now wife, Abigail Hepworth. And it kind of went like that. It was me kind of teaching her D&D, which she was vaguely aware with. She'd watched a little bit of Dimension 20 at that point. And then she ran a Western-inspired one-shot where the big like reveal of the season was that the bad guy was Jolene, and it was all like Dolly Parton lyrics. Honestly, it was great. And that ended up being a 2-shot because we ran long, as all, one-shots inevitably do.
Always.
But the format was there of like, let's teach someone how to do this. Let's do it with a new group and rotate around. And then let's talk about how we can do it better. And I liked that kind of like teaching format.
Yeah.
And then the second season, I wanted to bring on another friend, my buddy Shenuk, who is currently also one of the co-founders of Many-Sided Media, was in Prisoners of the Static, the second season of 20-Sided Podcast. And I don't remember why we did it, but we decided to run Honey Heist. And Honey Heist is a great one-page role-playing game, if you're not aware, by Grant Howitt of Rowan, Rook, and Deckard. And for whatever reason, I was like, wouldn't it be cool if Grant Howitt taught the game instead of me? Like, I didn't know how to play it.
Yeah.
And I was like, why don't I reach out to Grant Howitt and just see? And he got back to me like the same day and was like, yeah, this sounds cool. Let's do it. And I was like, oh, this is an even cooler idea of the game designer teaches the game, we play the game, and then we talk about what went right, what went wrong, and how we can do it even better. And that kind of became what we wanted to do. And we did a couple of seasons of one shots or two shots. They slowly started to creep up because I didn't want to post a 45-minute talking episode and then a 3-hour play episode and then a 45-minute talking episode. So we started breaking up a one shot in like 2 or 3 episodes. And then that drastically changed. We were kind of going along that route of finding the game designer, having them come on. So we had like Jay Dragon from Wanderhome. We had Elliot Davis, who was basically an acquaintance at the time. Now one of my best friends was, in my wedding party. And we played his game, Something's Wrong with the Chickens, which is a honey heist hack. We get through that and we decide to play a game called Die. And Die is a game made in conjunction with a very award-winning comic by the same name by Kieran Gillen, who's a very famous comic book artist, published by Rowan Rook and Deckard. Incredibly cool game, basically like fucked up D&D. And we wanted to do it up a little bit. We wanted to play multiple sessions. So we recorded 4 sessions. We ended up splitting it up into 6 time-wise. And we made this bigger season. And it got a very good response. People really liked it. They got really into it. And we went all in. We had our buddy Colin McClutchy, who goes by the name Behold as his musician moniker, make custom like a theme song for us. And then he also just like went above and beyond and made individualized themes for all the characters.
I mean, can't beat that.
Truly can't beat it. And it just so happened that right around the time that we were doing Die, we had submitted a previous season where we played the game 10 Candles to the New Jersey Web Fest. We got nominated for a bunch of things and we actually won Best Sound Design. And I'll be honest, if you listen to it, very well deserved. We crushed it.
We did crush that one. So
we absolutely crushed that one. But kind of that, and then the response to Die, and then our follow-up Good Society season where we had like just an amazing cast: Carolyn Page, Persephone Valentine, Nathan Yaffe, Emma Fife, and me. And Katie Maravich.
Yes.
All of a sudden we were just like, okay, let's keep stepping it up. Let's like keep seeing what we can do. Let's keep making this a little bit harder on ourselves, but better for the audience, and kind of focus in on what we want to do. And very quick, like me, Elliot, Chinook, and Abby formed Many Sided Media, which is our overall production company. And we started like really honing in of like, what is it we want to make? And what we wanted to make was shows that are for the audience, that bring you into the world of a new game, teach you how to play it, show you the best possible version of it, so that like you're really seeing what this game can be. And honestly, like kind of our goal is give you the Dimension 20 level production of a game that Dimension 20 probably never will play.
This is the point in the interview. It's like, great, I have 10 questions. Let's see if I can order them. First of all, I'm glad you kind of gave that like backstory of the kind of like pivot that you guys did. Because I remember I think it was like 2 days ago, I was poking through the 20-sided podcast feed, and I saw the announcement for my first dungeon, that little like 2-minute kind of trailer thing.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was very interesting to listen to it when it was pitched as that kind of first iteration of like, we're teaching people to play new games. But for me, the idea of a show evolving in such a kind of drastic manner. And again, obviously there is a through line. It makes sense. The trajectory, there is a narrative, kind of like meta thread,
right?
But that's a big change ultimately, that you just did in the feed. You just did it. Is that something that is kind of natural to you? Was that a big choice? Did it feel very just like, this totally makes sense that we're going to upend sort of the premise of this show as we're doing it? Because that to me could be very scary. That could be very like, what does our audience want? What do we want? Are we veering off too far? Does this need to be its own show? So what was the like experience, I guess, for you and for you guys?
I think there's a couple of things that, one is at the time our audience wasn't that big. So we're kind of like, hey, if a change happens and we lose everybody, we can start over. But I mean, the real answer is I always kind of like learning in public, and I like seeing people learn in public and like grow in public. So that felt good to me as well. And it kind of fit in with the theme of the show of like, we're learning a new game and like, we're learning how to podcast and stuff. But mostly all the changes we made, I think, were sticking to the main thread as best they could, but then making it better. Like, we were shedding the things that we didn't need and that weren't making the show great. So like, we don't just stick to D&D. We start looking at other games. We start talking to designers rather than just me with my, X amount of experience. Talk to the real expert on die, who's, Kieran Gillen. Like, you can't get any better than that. And the idea of upping the ante on what we promised early on, which was like, we're going to teach you how to play this game. Then we're going to show you how to play it. Then we're going to talk about how to do it better. That core always stayed. Now, of course, when you look at my first dungeon now, the big thing of it is that it's like, anthology actual play, and our actual plays are like incredibly highly produced. They've got like very cool players in them. And if you want to, you could fully remove the like learning aspect from your listening experience.
Sure. Yeah.
You don't need to listen to the interview. You don't need to listen to the post-game interview. You don't need to listen to the session 0 if you don't want to. But all those things are there. And it's really borne out for us really well in that we get a lot of comments or like emails of people just saying like, hey, I love this season. I picked up WildSea because of this show. Or I played my own Orbital Blues because now I understood how to play it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started to hear something like that, probably around the time of like Die and maybe 10 Candles, that was when it clicked of like, okay, we found the thing. We stumbled our way into the thing.
Something that I always find interesting is the process of taking a game written to be a table experience shared amongst friends or individuals, if we're talking, solo RPGs, etc., and then making that into a show, making that into something that not just is entertaining for someone to listen to, but also makes sense structurally, doesn't require too much finesse to make it make sense in an audio or visual kind of like format.
Right.
And you guys have now done quite a number of different systems. So as you guys are picking what to play, how do you start? Both in terms of like, what's a system that looks good? Do you start with a GM and ask them, hey, what do you want to play? Or like, what does, what goes into those first conversations of what can we turn into a podcast?
Right.
And how?
It's funny. We were just talking about, we were at dinner last night, the whole Many-Sided Media team, we were talking about what's our season for like the very end of the year. And the conversation, at least over the past year, since we've like officially formed Many-Sided Media, always starts with what game is going to be most fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, that's how we found Orbital Blues. That's how we did WildSea. Like, we saw WildSea at Gen Con last year. We were like, holy fuck, this game looks so fucking cool. And spoiler alert, it is.
Turns out.
And so that's been our first guiding light. We are a production company. Our second guiding light is looking at, can we make this into a podcast? Like, would this fit a podcast format? There are certain games that like we might not do if they're incredibly tactical, if that's what they want to be, because we're audio only and we kind of have to do some kind of theater of the mind. And then there's also an aspect of, we have been designing our business side around working with publishers about games we like, and usually coordinating that around Kickstarter releases, new game releases, so that they have a good reason to help finance the show. So just for instance, with our WildSea season, we were excited about WildSea the second we saw it. We met Felix Isaacs, the designer, at Gen Con at the Rowan and Decker after party, and we were chatting with him. He's a very cool dude. And we kind of like just briefly mentioned, oh, we might want to play the WildSea on the show. But so yeah, we want to start with games that we want to play, and then from that pile, look at games that are having a release or that the publisher is doing something that they might be able to support the show financially a bit. Definitely not the whole cost of production, but a portion of it. Because also, not only do we want people to play this game, but we want to be able to like support publishers and like uplift the publishers who are making Orbital Blues and WildSea. And it just makes financial sense for them to be promoting with an actual play something at the time when they most are looking to get money from people.
Yeah, definitely.
And our hope with how this will play out in the future, and it's slowly starting to come true with WildSea, is that by the end of a season, through discoverability or through like discount codes or stuff, the publisher has already made back the entire investment they'd given to us by the time the season ends. I don't think we'll quite get there with WildSea, but it is not an insignificant amount of money that we have proven to go back to them through just discount codes. And that's not to say all the people who have reached out to us personally and said like, oh, I bought Wild Sea. I didn't even know you guys had a discount code.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
like, I wish you did. We'd give you 20% off. It'd be nice to see more of these indie games getting the love that they truly deserve rather than just a bunch more D&D games. Not knocking D&D, but I think it has its market share. Let's get a little bit extra to all these indie games who are just as good, if not better.
Yeah. So this is it feels like a little bit of a sidestep, or like dog chasing car going different direction. But something that I find always kind of very interesting is, and you talked about it a little bit, is that moment of like, people are paying attention. The publishers we're working with are saying, yeah, people are buying our game, or you're hearing that organically, or whatever. And that truly you're being heard, you're being listened to. And you're obviously kind of going bigger and bigger with we have a new show with the crazy star-studded cast, and we're doing all this, kind of good work, and people are paying attention. What was the point where you're like, oh, hold on, some momentum is shift, and also kind of like, what was, looking back now, what's that experience been like, just kind of building momentum and growing?
I think when I finished the edit on 10 Candles and we listened back to that, I was kind of like, this is like that one we really upped our game on for whatever. I think it's because it's horror, and the game that we played was so good. And I was like, I have to support that. Like I have to do better because the whole cast did better. And then that was born out, we got an award from the Jersey Web Fest, which we're very grateful for. But I think even before that, we knew like, oh, this is a thing. I don't know if anyone's listening to it yet, but this is worthwhile. And we started stepping it up from there with Die, and then Good Society, and Orbital Blues, and 9 Lives, and now Wild Sea. Oh, and Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast, which we really, man, I've got a whole section to talk about our Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast season, about how it is one of the things I'm most proud of and one of the most foolish decisions we've made as a company. I feel like I can't just leave that lingering, because then people, the reason is because we're
building suspense. That's suspense. What it is, right?
Come back.
I'm just dropping, and there's that time I almost died. But first, let me tell you more about.
Yeah, I'm starting an unclosed loop. We'll answer why it was a bad decision for our company later on. But let me be very clear. Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast is one of the best games of all time. You should absolutely buy 2 copies, one to play and one to eat. That is the official recommendation of My First Dungeon. 2 copies of Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast.
Exactly. Feed your soul as well.
Honestly, I think we're still finding those moments of realizing people are listening. And every time you get one of those, it's great. Like, we had our first fan art for the Die season, and it's now hanging in our kitchen. Like, Elliot and Chinook got it printed for me for my birthday. And it was by a very young person. I want to say they were like 16 or 17 or something. And Chinook and Elliot reached out to them, and they're like, hey, can we give you like $100 for the print of this? And they were like ecstatic. They were like, yeah, totally. And I have it hanging in my kitchen. And there have been a lot of little moments like that. Honestly, getting asked to be on a podcast to talk about our show is like another moment of saying like, oh, people are listening. People like what we're putting out. I think each time we reach out to a publisher and show them like what we've done, and like, hey, do you want to work with us? Or reach out to a designer and say, hey, would you come on Talk at the Table to be interviewed? We do our best with interviews and with actual plays to like under promise and over deliver by as much of a margin as we can. And also like being very upfront with everyone of what the commitment is, what we can do, what we can't do. And so far, I'm trying to think if anything has like come out even remotely negative. Like, we haven't had any bad experiences with anything, because we're taking it as intentionally and deliberately as possible and just trying to make it better every time. Like, we want to outdo ourselves each season, because that's what we kind of expect from ourselves now, which is fun, and it's stressful, and it's, time consuming, and, edits now take 20, 30, 40 hours when they used to take 10, 11 hours, but it's just fun. It's the way we want to do it. And the biggest, signs that something is going right is never like the big things. And it's those small little bits of someone you love, someone you like, someone whose work you appreciate saying, oh, actually, I see what you're doing. That's pretty cool. That's the marks you put on the wall.
One thing that I think is really cool about a lot of the stuff you do is kind of the amount of people that you fold in, both in terms of like game designers, of like it's new, different game designers every time. And it's like, it's not just like, yeah, we're a podcast that supports only J Dragon, releases, even though that would be a great podcast.
I would love to make that
infinitely
podcast.
just have a bed and breakfast for all eternity. But, you cycle through a lot of people, different people are GMing. It's not only just you. Elliot's doing this season of Wild Sea, and you have a bunch of new players in, including like a lot of people who are like, hey, I know that person. That person is awesome. Yep. Hooray. So how do you go about, once you've decided the game, where it's like, this seems cool, it aligns, the publisher's on board, all that kind of stuff. How do you start putting together a table? What's the process of making sure that is as good as all the rest of, kind of bits of the show are?
In general, what we've been doing as Many-Sided Media is the four of us are generally all involved. So me, Abby, Shanuk, and Elliot. Recently, what we've been doing is three of us will play. Usually one of us will GM, two of us will play, and the last will act as a like outside ears producer. Yeah. So this season, Shanuk is not playing, but is the producer on the outside. Elliot did that for me during our die season, and it's wildly helpful. If you liked the ending of our die season, you should thank Elliot Davis because he had most of the best ideas. And then looking for cast, honestly, we look at the game, we look at kind of the vibe of the game, who we think would fit for the tone. So something like Hometown Holidays, which was our Christmas one shot. It's a game that is recreating a Hallmark Christmas movie.
Yep.
We're like, okay, we're doing holidays, Christmas movie, comedians, capital C comedians. So Shanuk was acquainted with or friends with Cassie Wilson, who's now on the cast of Bitcherton. And Cassie came in, I think we had like one pre-production call and came in and immediately was like 11 out of 10. Like usually the first couple of minutes of any session, regardless if it's on mic or off mic, people are a little bit timid. And even like professional comedians, even recording Bitcherton with like, Ify Wadiway, Carolyn Page, Cassie Wilson, Katie Maravich, Alex Songshaw, professional comedians all.
Oh, yeah.
There's usually a moment right at the beginning where it's like, you're kind of testing the waters just a little bit.
Definitely.
In both Hometown Holidays and in Bitcherton, Cassie came in so hard, just committed to the bit immediately.
Yes.
And so that's the sign to us that like, oh, that's working. We did it right.
Yeah, totally.
So it's usually looking at the tone of the season we want to do. For Wild Sea, it's sailing on the treetops in a post-Verdant world where the sea is gone and now you sail on top of massive 20-mile high trees on ships powered by chainsaws. And you're mushroom people or moth people or living amalgamations of metal. And we knew we wanted that to be like, that tone it's funny, it's fun, it's adventure, it's like high seas, but it is also like serious and can get a little darker. So we knew Elliot was going to run it, me and Abby. And we looked around at who we knew. And Jay Stroutman from Planet Arcana, they are one of our favorite performers.
One of the best.
Absolutely. If you haven't listened to Planet Arcana, go listen to Planet Arcana. It's phenomenal.
If you are listening to any episode of Reckless Talk or Attack and are not listening to Planet Arcana, you shouldn't be here. I've made that very clear.
I also just like a small praise that I've given to Jay and B and that whole team a couple of times. The trailer for that show is so good and has the best tagline of any like podcast I've heard, especially a D&D podcast. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You just have to go listen to it to find out.
Well, again, listeners of our show, there is some episode somewhere in our archives that has, I think, multiple of that trailer. So just go find it there. You should have listened to it already.
Hell yeah. So we knew Jay. We hung out with Jay at Breakout Con up in Canada and at PAX East last year. I just knew we wanted to play with them. Like, they're just fun. And we knew that they could hit this vibe. Norn Ali Kadir was someone who we knew through Super Dylan, who performed in the Atom List, also performed with Jay in Planet Arcana. Mm-hmm. And like, it was someone we were looking at. And then both Super Dylan and Jay were like, yeah, use Norton. Norton's great. And we bring Norton on, and he has that vibe of leans more towards the serious, but can also hit those comedic, like deadpan beats. So I'm like, great, 2 for 2. And then Kendrick Smith was someone who Elliot had listened to a number of, I want to say Tales Yet Told.
Yeah, Tales Yet Told.
I think that's where Elliot was first listening to him and was just like really impressed and taken with how immersive and like deep a performer he was. And so we're like, okay, great, let's bring him on. Let's see what happens. And then, the first time Bat speaks, I'm just like, yeah, this is it.
Yep, got it.
You have that confirmation almost immediately. And usually you'll find it in the pre-production meeting or in the session zero. Like, you'll know. Honestly, the answer is we're always looking around, seeing who's doing interesting stuff. The more out there, I'd rather have someone be taking wild swings and missing than someone not taking swings at all. So when we see people doing something interesting and that we're excited about, we're like, great, let's have them on.
So something also that's always, kind of interesting when you're doing all these different genres, different systems, different casts, even though, again, that kind of core four is always there in some capacity. So you have that trust and that kind of shared vibe and understanding to build off of. Do you have any advice about setting and discovering expectations going in of like, not just, oh yeah, we show up and we record on these days,
right,
but of, what safety looks like, what the tone is, just like setting up a table for success when some of these people may know each other, some of them might not. Obviously you do session zero and they are in the feed, which is always very kind of interesting and fun to listen to. That covers a lot of it, but just kind of broad strokes. How do you set yourselves up for success when you're churning through different casts, different ideas, different vibes?
It starts out with just setting expectations and being really clear about what is required and what the ask is. And that comes down to, like, I send a big email to every cast member and it is like, this is the rate. This is how much we pay players. We pay per hour. We have a guaranteed minimum. So even if we only record for 2 hours, you're getting paid for 3. We also are very clear about like what the time commitment is of like, we record for 3-hour chunks. We do 2.5 hours of gameplay plus a talkback episode. So I try to give you as much information as possible so that from the very beginning, if any of that is a problem, it's very easy to say no.
Yeah.
The further you get into a project, the harder it is for someone who's not necessarily in the position of power to back out of something.
Definitely.
And so you want to be able to give them as much freedom as possible to do that right away. So if the rate's not right, which has been true sometimes, if the time commitment's not right, which has been true sometimes, if the style of performance hasn't been right, which has been true once or twice, that's totally fine. It's like, no worries at all. We'll reach back out if something comes up that might fit you better. And so you always have to go into it of knowing that a no doesn't necessarily mean, no, I don't like you. It's, this one's not for me, or my schedule is busy. So that's always good to kind of have in the back of your mind. And then we kind of are now doing even more kind of session zero stuff in pre-production, like off mic, not necessarily tone or character building, but just like letting people know what our production process is, which is we will stop to re-record a line if you step on it or if you bump your mic. We will do pickups if something took 10 minutes when it really only needs to take a minute. We will go back and ask you to like do pickups of your character threw up. I need everyone to pretend to retch for a couple of minutes so we can do the sound design. Generally, our games are very fluid and they don't have much stop and start. But I want to make it very clear early on that like our primary audience is not the people at the table. I care very deeply about the people at the table and that they have a good experience. We're making this for the audience. That's the people who we care most about. And I don't want to diminish the people at the table. We have very strong rules about safety. We've got a lot of conversations about safety tools that we talk about on mic and off mic. But this is a podcast meant to be listened to by someone else. And when you go into it with that intention, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast, like having the proper intention, then everyone kind of has it in their mind of, oh, I'm not just playing for me. I'm not just playing for people at the table. I've got to play for the back of the audience. You've got to make your emotions bigger so that someone in the back of the theater can see you. If you're able to get everyone in the right headspace, and if you're able to have everyone on the same page, then a lot of the problems that could arise don't.
And I think this is kind of the last, because we have 2 other shows to still talk about, but this kind of is, I feel like a decent transition anyway, but kind of on that topic. You have kind of, again, a core group of people you've worked with for a while now, including your wife, including people who are in your wedding, like whole 9 yards, like close relationships. Not to over presume, but I'd imagine you're decently close, hopefully, with your wife. But
it's fair assumption.
But both in kind of those relationships that you've had a lot of experience with, that you kind of have been able to learn and grow with, and also kind of folding new people in. How do you experience giving and or taking feedback? That's always an interesting topic to me for someone for something that is so collaborative, like tabletop role playing games and making podcasts and doing both of those at the same time. And especially when there's a lot of people who bring a lot of different perspective, a lot of different needs of just how they like to be talked to and how they talk to other people.
So this is the thing I think we as a company are still trying to get better at. I don't think no one will ever be perfect at it, but we're trying to find those systems and make it easier and clearer. Internally, I think we have a very good system, or we're getting to be having a very good system of just being able to be very open with each other of like, hey guys, that didn't work. Like that kind of sucked. That felt bad. And there have been times in the Wild Sea or in previous seasons where we kind of got off the call and we were like, I wish we stopped here and had like taken it back. Like I didn't actually like this choice that got made. Like it was kind of bad for audio and stuff. Within the company, because we're very good friends, you know, Elliot and Shenuk were both in my wedding party. Like, you know, we're able to communicate pretty well. Could still be better. And I think we're actually trying to just be very open and honest with each other because we're equal owners in the company. We kind of have to be. With players, it's the easiest notes are the ones that happen earlier on. I think the further and further you get into a season, the harder it is to course correct because someone's already kind of started in having a character. They've found their rhythm. And all of a sudden, if you start bumping that rhythm, not only do they kind of fall out of rhythm, but they also start looking backwards and are like, oh, was I out of tune this whole time? To mix metaphors. There's a certain point where you have to wave the flag and be like, okay, we waited too long. We missed our shot to fix it. And it's true with like in film production, you know, people say fix it in post. Well, fix it in post takes twice as long and 4 times as much money. You'd rather fix it right in the moment. And a lot of times that can be difficult. And especially if you're kind of stepping on someone's character choice, if it just doesn't work for audio or for the story or for the tone, that job gets a lot easier if you set it up in pre-production that's a thing that could happen. And that not only is that a thing that could happen, that's a thing that has happened and has happened to, you know, me as a player, to Elliot as a GM, to Elliot as a player, to Shenuk, to Abby, that we care about what's happening at the table, but our primary audience is outside the table. And when you remember that, it's not me saying, that was bad, I didn't like it. It's me saying, hey, for our goal, that doesn't quite fit. That color contrasts with what we're doing. That note is not in our scale. To really mix metaphors.
But I followed all of it. So it's just expanding the brain.
Yeah.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by A Foul Light Shines, a new free serial novel based on a D&D campaign. The Empire of Fire and Water has known 20 golden years of peace since the end of Agenion's War, a peace which is now in peril. When a ragtag group of friends intervene in a grotesque monster attack, they're too late to save a wounded man who leaves them with an encrypted journal and the words, "Trust no one, Tyir." Can the gang find Tyir, escape the claws of more strange monsters, and uncover the lurking threat to the Empire before it's too late? This story features themes of found family and strength in diversity, and is available for free on Campfire and Royal Road. A Foul Light Shines. Come for the fantasy. Stay for the cheese-obsessed goblin gunslinger. Dark Dice is a critically acclaimed actual play podcast brought to you by Fool and Scholar Productions. With over 20 awards in sound design, Dark Dice brings its horror-themed campaigns to life with snappy combats, terrifying monsters, and tons of original music. Each episode is only 45 minutes long and features an all-star cast of seasoned role players and first-time players alike, including folks you might recognize, like Jeff Goldblum, Lily Pichu, and Jasper William Cartwright. Start with Season 1 and follow the adventurers on their quest to investigate a doppelganger, or jump into Season 2 and listen to a new story about a terrible, corrupting sound that infects all who hear it. Dark Dice is available for free however you listen to podcasts or at darkdice.com. So ask yourself, do you seek him So something that I really liked about My First Dungeon, and about obviously the whole other podcast that we haven't even talked about yet, are the interviews. You guys interviewing, kind of the game designers as part of the lead up to the actual play portion of the show. But also, obviously, you have your whole other show where you are interviewing some of my favorite people, certainly in this space, but a lot of really amazing people. The aforementioned Jay of Planet Arcana, friend of the show, Cassie Mothwin, the designer of Anamnesis, that's hard to say while rushing, Sam Lee, Rick Perry of Dimension 20, and like a zillion other folks. So where did the interviewing of people, I guess, like where did that kind of come into the vision?
I think we also stumbled into that because of My First Dungeon. Like, all thanks in the world to Grant Howitt for agreeing to coming on a random podcast to teach us how to play Honey Heist. But once we did that, we were like, oh, this is cool. This is fun. And we kind of kept doing that. And there was always a portion of that conversation that wasn't right for the show, wasn't right for My First Dungeon, but we wanted to still have with these people. Yeah. Like, we wanted to talk about tabletop role-playing games. We want to talk about actual play. We want to talk about like design and graphic design and like things that don't fit into the brief of My First Dungeon, but are still incredibly interesting. And so Elliot and I, we geek out a bunch together about tabletop role-playing games and about actual play and about design, just because of we're doing it all the time. We thought, hey, we're two white guys. Let's start a podcast.
Hey, who needs some more podcasts up in here, right? Everyone does.
More podcasts. Well, we went into it with a real intentionality of we wanted to interview people in the tabletop role-playing game and actual play community, and trying to find, like, coming up with topics and then finding the absolute best person to talk about that, or to talk to someone about something that they are expert in but maybe don't get to talk about enough. Rick Perry, who, like, we could talk about D&D miniatures and set design for days, but what we really wanted to talk about was, how do you collaborate well? Like, we always try to come into a conversation with a big goal. And for that interview in particular, it was like, how do you foster great collaborations in a way that you get to make what you want as an art director, and the cast and the DM get to make something that they want? Because those are two different languages that have to be translated well in order for them to mesh together.
Yeah, I thought that approach was very fun. It's very different than mine, where mine is very much like, let's just like talk to the whole person and like see what insights they have. And that, you definitely have a kind of very clear idea of what you want to talk to these people about. And obviously that you get into a lot of stuff, but I am always very impressed when you and Elliot sit down with someone that you have kind of a breadth of knowledge of what this person has done. It seems like many times you had a pre-existing kind of relationship with the stuff that they're making before you even considered having them on as a guest, let alone doing like extra research and stuff. So what does your kind of preparation look like? What kind of creators are you looking for? And just how do you generally kind of hone in on making it a good, kind of tight hour conversation?
I'll speak to preparation first. Elliot and I will get on the phone usually a day before, sometimes day of. We'll know what to research beforehand, but we start off by making an outline, and we always start with, what is that central question? That's the scaffolding that we can hang all the other things on. And we found that our best interviews are when we had that question really nailed down. And often the ones that we consider the least successful are often ones that we come into without a clear idea. Like, we have someone cool on, but we don't know exactly what the conversation is. But in terms of preparation, we are always looking at that central question and then trying to find a through line, and usually relating it to whatever the person is working on right now, because often that's the reason that we got them on. And for that, we're always kind of like, we always have our eyes on like Twitter or Instagram or like Rascal, anyone that is reporting on or like sharing news to the tabletop community. And the second we see something that is interesting, we flag it, and we're like texting it to each other. And I think this was kind of born out of, on the My First Dungeon feed, I did a series of interviews way back when with Taylor Moore, who was then the sound designer for Rude Tales of Magic and Others of Sort of Space and Fun City, and now most notably for Worlds Beyond Number. And he had posted kind of like an obscure comment on a Reddit thread that I happened to see, but it was very detailed. It was a long, big comment. You can find it somewhere. And it was really interesting. It was saying things that I hadn't quite thought of or hadn't been able to put into words. And I was like, I want to talk to that person about that. And so I hit him up, and we did what was planned to be an hour interview, and he got on the phone and was like, hey, do you have anywhere to be? And I said, no. And he goes, good, because I'm about to go off. I was like, let's do it.
You love to hear it. Love to hear it.
And that has remained true for all the other interviews we've done with Taylor. It's always, we plan for 45 minutes and we get an hour and a half, which is great because we just love talking. But I think preparation is always having that central question. It is finding branches off of that always try to relate back. And also, we always go into an interview with 2 pre-roll questions that we ask off mic. And the first one is, what would make this a home run for you? Like, what is kind of your goal for this interview? Like, if you have something you definitely want to promote, or if there's, something that you'd like us to do, let's do that. And the second is, what is something that you haven't gotten to talk about in your last couple of interviews that you'd love to talk about now? And a lot of times people don't have an answer for us. They're just like, I don't know, let's just have a good interview. And I'm like, great.
Totally.
But every now and then you get people who are like, actually, I haven't gotten to talk about my work in blank. And I'm like, great. Either I already had prepped that, or I didn't know that was the thing. And now we get to learn together. And we're setting up our guests to be excited about what they're talking about. And also, I've heard some horror stories from friends of people going on interviews and the person is clearly not researched them, or doesn't know what they're about, or is referencing the wrong game that actually wasn't the one they designed.
Yep.
And it's that just sucks all the air out of the room. But the more I can know about you and be excited about you and be excited about asking very detailed and specific questions, the easier my job is, because the best interviewers know to, and listener, you can tell by the amount I'm talking, when Nathan asks the question, he then sits back and shuts up and lets me talk.
Or I very carefully edit out all of my nonsense. So it really seems like, wow, what a great, phenomenal listener Nathan is.
And it's not to say, if this was reversed, if you were on Talk at the Table, my job is to shut up. But the greatest interviewers out there will ask a simple, pointed question and then back off. And the more researched and the more clear idea we have of what we want, the easier time we have of doing that and letting the guest really shine, because that's ultimately, no one's coming to or very few people are coming to the podcast for us. They're coming for whoever the guest is and for their insights, because ultimately pretty much every guest we have, I don't want to say pretty much every guest we have on is more expert in their field than we are. And that's the reason we have them on. We want to learn from them. We want to share that information with the audience.
And I, as someone who has done this, kind of a lot of tabletop interviews over the years, know how unfair of a question I'm about to ask. It's not the most unfair question that one can ask, and I will sidestep that. But is there anything because you guys have done a good number of episodes, you're doing them weekly and are really kind of turning stuff around very quickly. Is there anything where you look back on from having had all of these conversations with some truly excellent people that you are like, oh, that changed how I look at things, or this shifted something or confirmed something for me that kind of goes beyond the normal, oh, I have learned something by the simple exchange of conversation that really is oh, I am enriched thanks to this conversation.
I'm going to pull up our guest list real quick.
See if believe me, I understand that this was the unfair question to ask. Not the most one, in that I didn't ask who was your favorite guest of all time. Who's the best one and who's the worst one? Let's do a power ranking right now of all the guests that have been on your show.
Listen, I'm not going to lie. We have an internal list. I'm just kidding.
I have an emotional list.
We love all of our guests equally. There is one I'd like to talk about, because it wasn't the reason we ended up doing this interview was because of a moment we had in a live actual play. And this was our recent interview with Bridget Jeffries, who works with Chaosium, is a Call of Cthulhu actual play. She plays on, I believe it's Miskatonic University. And me, Elliot, and Shenuk were up at Breakout Con in Toronto. And Shenuk had been invited to play in a Call of Cthulhu live game, like a live actual play. And the game master was Bridget Jeffries, who was not someone I was familiar with. And she got up there and blew me away. Absolutely knocked my socks off. It, from both a performance perspective and just a craft perspective.
Yeah.
She did a number of things, and we talked about this in the episode. The first 10 minutes is just us fawning over her, because we're the reason we want you on this podcast is because we left that talking about you for the next 2 hours. And there were things that she did, just GM style wise, that I took from that. And the next day when I was running Orbital Blues, did those things.
Yeah.
And it was just such a great moment that I hadn't had in a while of someone doing something and me being like, oh,
yeah,
I didn't know it could be done that way. And I think that was the same thing I felt when I first watched like Dimension 20 after having watched Critical Role. I was like, oh, there's a different way.
Yeah.
And it's not, I won't say better or worse, like everyone has their own opinions, but it is different.
Definitely.
I always love seeing someone taking like huge swings, and it's even better when they connect. And Bridget, batting average of 1,000 during that live show. I wish there was a recording that I could just like point people to, but it was a moment that happened live, and it was ephemeral, and it existed for the moments we entered the room until when we left. But it had a very strong impact on both me and Elliot, and we had to have her on the podcast. And she was great on the podcast as well. I think that's the strongest, like most recent, like wow moment that someone gave me was Bridget Jeffries. Yeah.
Well, have you ever had one of those where it's like, I have a transition, and then you realize as you're about to say it, is this actually a good question transition? I don't think so, but I'm just going to ignore all the transition I was about to say. I'd like to talk about Bitcherton.
I just want to say coward.
I was gonna say something about like speaking of powerful moments or something, but it's like I don't
okay, no, you're right good.
Right, exactly. So, and now I'm forced by honor to keep that in the final cut, so thank you, I appreciate that, Brian.
See, this is the thing that my players do to me. They know that if they do a joke enough times, I have to keep it in, so they'll see on my face when I'm not digging something, they'll be like, fuck you, I like this, we're gonna make this joke 3 more times.
This is getting in. So it was such a weird thing to see Bitcherton get announced. And I mean that in a good way. Like, that is positive. Because again, like I was, kind of familiar with my first dungeon and Talk of the Table. I had started kind of dipping into the Discord a little bit, which I don't know if we'll have time to talk about, but is such a lovely resource for anyone who's interested in actual play stuff, and also for the shows that you guys produce. Mm-hmm. And then just like kind of just dropped like a nuclear bomb is what it felt like, of like, hey, by the way, we're doing this drastically different show with this preposterously good cast, and we're kickstarting it in like a month or whatever, and buckle up. And it was just so immediately like, oh, holy shit, that's crazy. So just for a refresher for everyone, could you just give people the kind of the rundown of what Bitcherton is? Yeah. And just talk a little bit about how it came together, especially coming from a group of folks who's very like tabletop game oriented, and to how this evolved into what it is.
So Bitcherton is an improvised comedy Regency podcast. It's basically improvised Bridgerton, Jane Austen, and it is starring an insane group of people, Katie Maravich, Ife Wadiway, Alex Songshaw, Carolyn Page, Cassie Wilson, and me. There's one odd person out there, and that is me, baby.
And also myself.
And it came about, so it is a drastic difference from our actual play shows, because actual play inherently has kind of two stories. There's the stories of the people making it at the table, and the story that they are making.
Yeah.
You get to see the writer's room and the script. For Bitcherton, it is a audio fiction podcast. It is improvised, but you're never going to hear the out of character talk. You're never going to hear any of those moments. It's all entirely in world and supported fully with original music and sound design. The reason we did this, there's a podcast that I love, and it is my favorite podcast ever, period. Hard, full stop. And that is Mission to Zix.
Yep.
Mission to Zix is an improvised comedy sci-fi podcast that is kind of like Star Trek, Star Wars, but like way weirder. It's incredibly funny. It's got guest stars every episode, including people you might know. I believe Reika was on it. Reika Shankar, Ife Wadiway was in an episode. Alex Songshaw was in an episode. Brendan Lee Mulligan was like a major villain. I want to say Oscar Montoya was in one.
Yeah, it's because it's like I think it's 100-ish episodes.
It's just about 100 episodes. And when I first heard it, it absolutely blew me away. It has amazing sound design by Shane O'Connell. The improvisation is so good and so fun and feels so natural in a way that audio fiction podcasts so often feel stilted.
Yeah.
Because it's just hard. Like, actors are used to delivering with the full range of emotion and physical features and body. And when you script something, there's always that little hitch in your giddy up that when you have it be improvised, it goes right past that. And it it just blew me away. I binged 100 episodes in like, I don't know, a couple of months.
Yeah.
And when I say a couple, I mean 1 or 2.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think I was like in there, I don't know, the Spotify yearly rankings. I was like in 0.001% of Mission of Six listeners.
Mm-hmm.
It just blew me away. And I thought it was phenomenal. And I wanted to do something like that because I was starting to get much more into sound design. I sent Shane O'Connell, who's their sound designer, our 10 Candles episode. Because I was like, hey, I did this because of you. Like you guys, it is not a exaggeration to say like, you guys made something so good, it changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very kind and gave me some notes back on it, which I've used to this day. And I wanted to do something like that, but I didn't know what it was. And then we did a season of My First Dungeon where we played the game Good Society, which is a Jane Austen Regency role-playing game by Story Brewers, who are a phenomenal company down in Australia. You should check out all their games. And that was incredibly fun. Carolyn Page was the facilitator for that, the GM equivalent. It was me, Nathan Yaffe, Katie Maravich, Emma Fife, and Persephone Valentine. And it's still actual play. We still use mechanics, and there is still that out-of-character conversation, in-character conversation. But we leaned a little more towards in-character. We got a little closer to that Mission of Six type thing. And I was like, oh, this would be cool. When we kind of like talked about it a little bit, we're like, oh, wouldn't that be cool if this was the thing? But we didn't really have, it didn't click in our minds yet, so we let it go. And then at some point down the line, Carolyn Page brought it back up and was like, hey, I'd love to do like a long-term Good Society game. And I'm like, I kind of would too, but I kind of want to do this. Like, I want to do it all in world. And then at some point, I'm pretty sure it was Carolyn, said the word Bitcherton. And I was like, great. That's it. That has to exist. Like there it is. Like that locks it all into place.
Yeah, you are doing a universal disservice if you do not take that and then do something with it.
Exactly. Let me be very clear. I don't think you should build a show around a really good punny title, but in this case, we were already looking for it, and it was like the cherry on top.
Yeah, I'm not going to say you shouldn't either, though. You know, like there's middle ground, I think, between both of those.
Exactly. So we saw that, and we were like really excited about that, and started looking to cast it. We reached out to a number of people who we'd already worked with before. We loved Cassie we just recorded Hometown Holidays with her, and I was blown away by her. Carolyn was already on board, obviously. Me. Katie Maravich was also phenomenal in Good Society. And honestly, I've said this in every interview I've ever given about Katie. Katie is not only extremely funny, as you might expect, she is extremely good to work with. Like just very communicative, very kind, in a way that I'm like, oh, I'll work with you on anything. Like mayonnaise commercial, let's do it. So it was a thrill that she was interested in coming back on. Alex Song Shah was someone who I'd worked with in New York on a couple of things, and we'd stayed in contact. We'd stayed like distant friends after they moved out to LA, and I'd been trying to get them on 20-Sided Podcast, and we just missed each other. And I've always been a huge fan of Alex's both writing and improv, and so they were one of the first people I thought of as well. And luckily, the timing worked out this time. And then the last person was Ife Wadiwe, who I don't know personally in any way, shape, or form. Carolyn's worked with him, and so's Katie at Dropout. One of them gave me his email address, like kind of let him know that I was going to reach out. And I sent this big long email. The email I was talking about earlier in this interview of like, here's the time commitment, here's the pay, this is just going to be a pilot episode. We're going to see if it works. If it works, we'll try to do a bigger thing. A big email, an email that like your eyes would glaze over, and I had to try to like make it look as good as possible.
Roughly the experience of looking over the Reckless to Talk prep sheet, for example.
Yes. Yeah, very similar. And it's
eyes
like,
crossed. 100%.
you got headers and you got underline and bold. Yep. It's a big thing. I sent it off to Ife. Maybe a day later, I get an email back. And it's an email that is 2 words long. And they're the only 2 words that I communicate with Ife Wadiwe before we start recording the thing. Or before we meet for the session 0. And the words were, let's boogie.
I mean, what more do you need? Like, come on, that's perfect.
You don't need anything else. It was a perfect introduction to this person who's incredibly funny and who I've admired from afar. But to this day, I wasn't positive going into session 0 or going into like the pre-production meeting if he was going to show up. Yeah, I was like, I'm pretty sure, but you never know. But it was great. And we did a session 0, kind of like built out our characters together. And then we recorded an episode. And we didn't know if it was going to work. We didn't really know the production process. We'd kind of done something similar with our Project Echo season and our Anamnesis season, where they were like entirely in-world kind of audio dramas, but they weren't comedies. They were a little bit different. They were built more around a game. This had no game mechanics. We decided not to use Good Society just because we wanted the improvisers to be fully free to do whatever they wanted. And at the end, we were like, I think we have something. I think we've got it. Like, let's take it to the editing room. Let's make sure. And by the time I finished like the first or second pass of the edit, I was like, yeah, that's a thing. This is a thing that should exist in the world and likely can.
Knowing that there is recording yet to happen, assuming the Kickstarter, again, I think you've already done a bunch of great stuff and it's been up for like 2 days as of recording this or something like that. So something that I'm really interested in is, and I think this both harkens to kind of your actual play stuff, but also how you arrange something like Bitcherton. What amount of in-between recording prep do you guys do as a group? Like, is the plan, especially for Bitcherton, to be like, all right, we want this to be improvised, we want to be spontaneous, but also, we want to have some narrative structure to this. What do you guys do as far as collaboration goes, of figuring out tone, of figuring out what direction to take, of, making sure that moments are set up so that you can kind of set everyone up to do the things that they want to be doing?
So our plan going into, assuming we're able to fund for the first season of Bitcherton, I guess I'll talk about what we did for the pilot and what I want to do going forward. Because for the pilot, it is a little bit more structural than what I think the show will actually be in its final form. And that's just because we had to introduce a bunch of characters. We had to introduce kind of our overarching plot. So we came into that recording with kind of like 5 or 6 bullet points of like kind of act breaks that we had to hit, of like, we got to introduce Violet. We got to kill the father, which happens in the first minute and a half of the show. So, not too much of a spoiler. So we did have these kind of like benchmarks that we knew we had to hit so that we could set up of a season. And the tone and stuff was all established kind of in a session 0 of like, we're not beholden to historical accuracy, but we want to head nod towards it. This is more like a fantasy version of Jane Austen than it is actually Jane Austen. But also like we did a long call and consultation with Dr. Emily Friedman, who is not only an actual play scholar, but also a Jane Austen scholar, a doctor. This.
Yeah.
That conversation was great because we started asking a few questions. And then at some point, Em stopped us and was like, would you like me to just talk at you for an hour and a half? And I was like, that's exactly what I want. Can we please do that?
I beg of you. Yes.
And Em incredibly kindly gave us a hour and a half world-class lecture of an entire, semester worth of stuff, just boiled down an hour and a half, giving us all the like coolest and funniest tidbits that are things that will like become plot hooks in the show. Yeah. But going forward, what I want to do, and this is roughly what Mission to Zix did, and it's something I want to emulate, is each episode will have a guest star, which we've already started announcing some of those, Rekha Shankar, Teo Yang, Nathan Yaffe, who will come in with a character that's going to be introduced kind of in Act 1. And that character will have some kind of impetus for being there. They are the debt collector coming to collect the debt. They are a potential match, a person to be wooed. They are a noble coming into town who's actually a con man, all this type of stuff. And that kind of forms the basis of the story for the episode. And we'll improvise through and find an ending. The thing I really want to do is the people that we got on for the show are improvisers, are people who, like, I think for most of them, I don't think it would be out of line to say that like that's how they would define themselves, maybe even more than comedians. And the best way that I can help them do the thing that they're good at is by taking my hands off the reins.
Yeah.
First episode, we had our hands kind of on the scales a little bit to make sure we got what we needed to set things up. The best version of this show is Nathan Yaffe comes in, wants to play Matt Berry, and just go, well, welcome everybody.
Yeah.
And we just do that.
And that's the thing. Yeah.
And the fun of it is that, if you've ever been to, a Herald night at UCB, or if you've ever seen long form improv, performers, when they're trained for it and when they practice it, improvisers are able to find that very satisfying narrative structure with surprising regularity, like a very high batting average. And also we have the added advantage of we're not live to tape, like we're not on a stage and we have to nail it. And we're not like beholden to a time limit necessarily, We could, if we don't quite nail it, go back and be like, hey, maybe we should have him get hit by a horse or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we can all play towards that. But the less we can have our hands on the scale, I think the more dynamic our performers can be. And that's really what I want to do.
Yeah, I'm phenomenally excited to see how it all shakes out. And hopefully this will introduce other people to the idea and get them also as excited as I am to check it out.
Yeah.
Well, out of respect for the amount of time I've already taken up of your life in talking, I had one final question for you, and that is how do you do it all? And specifically just because like you guys, like there's new episodes of all your shows all the time. You're doing a new Kickstarter of this like big production, improvised things, again, weekly interviews, and like they're always in-depth, thoughtful, well done interviews. And you said episodes of My First Dungeon are like dozens of hours to put together. So you can either speak for yourself, kind of speak kind of holistically for your kind of like the production team generally, whatever is kind of most appropriate. But do you have any kind of wisdom or tips about how you balance churning out stuff, but also staying creative and staying curious to learn about new games and new game designers and new things to check out and come up with ideas and just how do you navigate all of the glories of creating content with double capital C's?
Man, I could do a whole other hour on this, but so speaking kind of holistically as a company, we are doing our best to measure twice, cut once, work smarter, not harder. And a lot of that kind of plays back into our kind of ethos as a company, ethos as both My First Dungeon and Talk of the Table, of doing something with intentionality.
Yeah.
There are a lot of games that we could play that are like, this would be cool to play. And we always ask the second or third or fourth question after that of not only why is it cool, but like, why is it good now? Are we the people that should be telling it?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have the capacity to do it? And trying to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success with each new thing, but also creating something that we're really excited about. So, the worst version of this company is we go to a publisher and say, what new game are you excited about? We'll make it for you. We'll make it really cool and whatever. We'll get the coolest people on. And that's a bummer because we're likely not excited about all the things. The best version is we find a game that we're really excited about. We go to a publisher and say, hey, we're so excited about this. We want to make a thing. We'd love your support. Look at all the things we're going to do for you. We're going to make original music. We're going to make this actual play that will live on forever that you can point to people to. We're going to have these great people come on and like help promote it. Will you help us out, make something really cool that will elevate what you're doing? And that company mentality, that ethos has been paying dividends thus far and also just feels good.
Yeah.
Like just a living life standpoint, like that feels good. We work with cool people who make cool stuff and we do it in a cool way. And that feels pretty good. From a purely practical standpoint, Elliot edits Talk of the Table. I edit My First Dungeon. Chinook has been taking on the bulk of the edits for our Patreon content, which is our talkbacks and our bonus actual play every month. And so that's kind of the split of labor. But then we still have to crank out a bunch of episodes. And, an episode of Talk of the Table might take 3 or 4 hours to edit because it's just 2 or 3 voices. An episode of My First Dungeon is usually in the 20 to 30 because it's an hour and a half with tons of voices and a bunch of sound design and original music and all this stuff. And that 20 to 30 does not include the amount of time that our musician Behold is taking to create all this great original music. The practical reason of how that's possible is that I'm being wildly financially irresponsible by just making this my full-time thing and trying to make this work as a profession. Is that wise? No. Let's be very clear. Is this a industry that can even support that? We don't really know. There's not a lot of people who are able to do it full time, but I worked very hard for a number of years. I had a lot of savings. I'm happy to eat into some of those savings and not only try to build something cool that I'm proud of that I want to make for the long term, but also like use that time in the same way you would if you went back to school. Like I'm sitting every day in front of the thing, making the thing.
Yeah.
Like the reason I've gotten better over the past year and a half is that I've been doing it for the past year and a half every day nonstop.
Yeah.
And as far as, how to do it healthily, that's the thing I fight with every day. But I have been getting better about it of trying to, the biggest problem with artistic work is that the easiest person to steal from is yourself, in that like theft of time, theft of opportunities, the easiest person to shortchange is yourself or the people in the collaboration with you. So really trying to maintain 9 to 5 hours. You know, I wake up every morning and I go for a 5-mile walk around Central Park, just so that like no matter what, I get my steps in and I'm outside in the world. And also I get to enjoy Central Park. I'm 3 blocks from Central Park. I'm doing something wrong if I'm not in there every day.
Yep.
And I think actually, you know, to close that loop, I said way earlier about our Yazeva's Bed and Breakfast season. Yazeva's Bed and Breakfast is one of my favorite games of all time. It's a slice of life game about a heartless witch who lives in the woods in a bed and breakfast and all the crazy denizens that live there. And it's incredibly touching and moving and deep and can get dark, but is also joyful and lovely. It's Saturday morning cartoon of tabletop role-playing games. There's a fictional world within that game where every day is September 15th, because that's Yazeba's favorite day of the year. So we decided, as a fun thing, to release a full season of Yazeva's Bed and Breakfast. That's 6 actual play episodes, plus 2 more on our Patreon, plus a talkback for each of them, plus a interview with Jay before and after, all on September 15th.
Yep.
And also, we were like, you know what's better than a present? A surprise present. So we didn't market it at all going into it.
Uh-huh.
And we were just like, let's release all this stuff and try to make it a big event. And let me tell you, surprise release and bingeable drop should not happen together. One of those two is good.
Yeah. Yep.
But like, that was a very fun idea. And I'm very glad we did it. And I'm incredibly proud of that season. I think we put together some really fun episodes with great guests. It's very fun. Some really cool original music from a bunch of different people. And just some great fun stories for a game that I really, really, really love and want to see succeed. But we put a lot of work into it. And even for as much help as Possum Creek and Jade Dragon were able to give us to like help promote it, we didn't necessarily see the dividends. We worked harder rather than smarter. I'd rather make something amazing like that, spread it in a way that is responsible, not only for us, but also for the audience. Because getting inundated with, if you're on our Patreon, you got like 18 emails in a day.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We had to send out an email beforehand to warn you, like, hey, we can't turn off these automatic emails, so you're going to get like 18 of these, but I promise you it's worth it. And people were excited, but it is a lot to ask.
Yes, right. Well, see, next time, just release one 12-hour audio block for patrons. And then they only get the one email, and then they don't have to, skip to a new episode or anything.
See, that would have been smart. But
Would it?
We didn't. I don't know. It might be better. I don't know.
It's different. It's a different choice, to be certain.
Exactly.
Brian, I am ashamed because I feel like, looking back at everything we talked about, I could ask 8 more questions about literally every topic that we've already talked about for like 2 hours. And so I would like to apologize mostly to myself for not having the time and energy and focus to do all of the things that I want to do. But I would also like to apologize to you because the fun time is over, unfortunately.
Oh, no. I was told this was coming.
Yes. Well, that's because our legal team has informed me that there could be repercussions if we don't have you sign the waivers, all that kind of stuff. Because unfortunately, it is time for the Reckless a Talk lightning round.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
Yes. So
how did you change the weather so quickly?
It is an expensive process. We have refined it over the years.
It can't be worth it.
Our druids are on retainer, luckily, and we've streamlined it very well. But for you and for listeners at home who may not know, the lightning round is how we end all of our shows. It is the same questions in the same order to all of our guests. It is a soul-rending experience whereupon we look upon the truest components of the person and weigh it and judge them accordingly, like we were an Egyptian god of death. I tell everyone there are no wrong answers despite the intensity of it, other than like lying, just because that's like lame, I guess.
Sure.
But that can include long rambling answers, thought-provoking ones, or it could be one word. It could be, I don't have an answer for that. Next question. I will look at you. I will confirm that is the end of your answer. I will nod sagely, and we move on to the next answer until we have run the full gamut, or you have had whatever kind of stress-related panic incident that may or may not occur during the course of this very intense experience.
Excellent.
Are you ready?
I mean, is that the first question? Is this a start? Am I already doing it bad? Am I doing a bad job?
I am not allowed to weigh in at this juncture about how it's going.
Oh my God.
But your response has been noted.
My hands are so sweaty. Yes. Yeah. Is this on? Yes. Yes. I am ready. Yes. I answer in the affirmative. Yes.
The question that may or may not be the first question of the lightning round. Is your glass half full or half empty?
My glass is half full. I try to keep my glass always half full. I always top it off. But if I'm honest, my cup runneth over. I'm filled with blessings from friends and family and from people listening to my goofy ass shows and our goofy ass shows. And yeah, cup runneth over.
What excites you creatively, spiritually, and or emotionally?
Creatively, I like seeing people make big swings. I love it when people miss with big swings. Not for like any schadenfreude thing, but like if you make a big swing and you miss, it's way better than playing it safe. And every now and then you hit it and it flies out of the park.
What does not excite you creatively, spiritually, and or emotionally?
This is a bad answer, but I don't get excited by ideas. I think everyone in the world has a better idea than anyone who they think is the most creative person in the world. I guarantee if you sat with, I don't know, someone who you don't think of as being a creative for 20 minutes and asked them for a good idea, you'd get one. What I care about more, what I prefer to big ideas is big action. It takes way more to actually do the thing than to think about the thing. So I don't value ideas. I value action.
What is your favorite sound?
One of my cats. We've got two cats named Bart Harley Jarvis and Roy Donk. They're both named after characters from the show I Think You Should Leave Now. Neither Abby nor I have seen that television program. They were part of a litter. Bart Harley Jarvis will sometimes hide under our covers. And when he does, he's obviously a lump. And you'll go up to him. And as you go to touch him, to like pet him, but like pet the comforter over top of him, he will give out this little tiny coo. And it's the smallest, cutest little thing in the world. And it's my favorite sound.
What sound do you hate?
Subway brakes.
Ooh.
Not all subway brakes, but like every now and then it hits that particular frequency that's bad. But I love the subway. Shout out MTA. You guys are doing great work. Truly the Lord's work.
This week's sponsor, the MTA. What's your favorite word?
Halcyon.
What is your least favorite word?
I don't think I have a least favorite word. You know what my least favorite word? This is dumb, but this is just a purely editor answer. My least favorite word is
Yeah, I knew as soon as you said the word editor, it's like there's one of three words that it possibly could be, and that was culprit number one.
Oh, actually, this is a tangent, but a thing that I've been doing recently in our actual play edits is going back for a while. I've been cutting out anytime anyone says because it's just dead space. I cut out filler, and you save each audience member like a couple of minutes by just cutting out ums. The thing that I've been cutting out recently that I found is really, really good, I think this is a secret hack that I've discovered, is when a player starts to describe what their character is doing, they'll often say, I think, and then they'll say their character's name. I think Whistling jumps. If you cut out I think, usually it acts so much as an that the difference between I think Whistling jumps up on the train. If you cut out I think, you just get Whistling jumps up on the train, which makes all the performers seem way more like confident and active than that I think does.
Ooh, very cool. What tabletop role-playing game and or D&D, monster, antagonist, whatever is appropriate, have you not faced and or run that you would love to?
I've never faced a beholder, and I would like to. I know that's a very simple answer, but I would like to. Not run. D&D specifically, I've never run a Tarrasque. I don't know if it's actually an interesting monster, but it's the biggest one, and I'd like to try it.
It big, so it good.
Yeah, it big, it do smashy.
Yes. What is your favorite adventure of all time? And this can be one you've read, one you've written. It can be a tabletop one. It can be 1999's The Mummy. Whatever adventure means to you.
You know, I got to say, I just watched 1999's The Mummy for the first time, expecting to be blown away. I thought it was good.
Well, that's the end of this week's interview. Thank you so much, Brian, for being here.
That's fair. I think I might have bad taste. I think I might be wrong, but that in my heart of hearts, that's how I felt.
Interesting.
Favorite adventure of all time is The Adventure Through Time and Space by Doctor Who.
Ooh.
Just the whole series of it. Also, adjacently, I mean, Douglas Adams wrote for Doctor Who, so I'll also say Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
What is your favorite tabletop role-playing game character of all time? Similarly, it can be one you've played. It could be an NPC. It could be one that you watched or listened to someone else do. It can be whatever it is that strikes your fancy.
I loved playing Dick Whiskey in our Orbital Blues season. He's just this guy that's just trying to figure out what the hell's going on, man. And it was very fun. I think I really loved Elliot Davis playing Parrish in Are You Davis Bed and Breakfast season. He had just like the best voice for Parrish that we didn't hear before we started recording, and then came up and it was phenomenal. I'm just going to go through the many-sided media. I'm going to say my favorite character from all the many-sided media people.
This is your time. So you answer as however you feel empowered to do so.
Hell yeah. I'm just going to hype up all my friends. Ooh, Chinook's best character. That's tough. Maybe Jayamal from our Die season. I really love Jayamal. But also his character from our Orbital Blue season was phenomenal too. I'm going to say Jayamal though. I think that was my I really saw Chinook's eyes just kind of like light up a number of times, and that was really fun. My favorite character from Abby, I loved her playing Gertrude in Ezeba's Bed and Breakfast. Ooh, is it Azora? I think it might be Azora from the Wild Sea. Is just like such a great character. And if you want to hear just the most heartbreaking thing, I think specifically both Chinook and Abby, their ending on our 10 Candles game, which, you know, spoiler alert, no spoilers for 10 Candles, it is a tragic game where everyone dies at the end. You have to die at the end. Their endings are both like just so heartbreaking, and you love their characters so much, and it's so hard. But it's in that way that you really want it to be. It's very fulfilling and fun.
Last question. What gives you hope?
I think that it gives me hope in like just people when, you know, I give all the props in the world to Grant Howitt for saying yes when a random podcast said, hey, would you come on the thing? But the more that we talk to people in the tabletop industry and the actual play industry, the more we realize like everyone's just kind of down to like help each other out, lift each other up, share their knowledge. And I've really yet to be disappointed when I reach out to someone. It's always people being very excited to share what they have, very excited to share what they know, and very excited to just like come and talk and hang. And I joke that it's always cool when people who make cool things are cool people. Yeah. It's always like the biggest relief and confirmation of joy in the world. So that gives me some hope.
Brian, congratulations. You have made it not only to the end of the Reckless to Talk lightning round, but also Reckless to Talk itself. Woo! Congratulations. Be sure to level up your character in between, but also as a great reward, could you please remind everyone who you are and have been, where they can find you, how best to support you?
Hell yeah. I think I'm going to be multi-classing into fighter next. I haven't really tried that.
Get that fighter dip.
I got to get that fighter dip, get that extra attack. Yeah, I am Brian Flaherty. I have been, and always will be Brian Flaherty. I'm one of the co-founders of Many-Sided Media. We run My First Dungeon, Talk of the Table, and most recently, Bitcherton, which is currently being crowdfunded on Kickstarter from June 13th to July 13th. So head on over there if you want to help us make more of that show. You can even listen to the full-length, fully sound designed, scored pilot episode right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me online on Twitter, Instagram, all the places. I believe on Twitter, I'm Mr. Brian Flaherty, and on Instagram, I'm bflair42. That's that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy poking through there with the 42.
Well, and we will have links to all of that in the show description, as well as many, many other things. But Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Oh, and just on the off chance that anyone came to this episode specifically to listen to me, can you please do me a quick favor? I think Jasper William Cartwright did this on our episode of Talk of the Table. Other people have done it for him. If you came here to listen for me, if you've gotten all the way to this point, you're hearing my voice right now, that means you like hearing me, you like this podcast, and you should go on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review and a very nice word in a rating. It is something that podcasters are always trying to get people to do because it's incredibly helpful.
Yes.
And it also just makes us feel good. So take the time right now. Do it. It takes 10 seconds. And you just open up your podcast player, 5-star review, write a review, and tell Nathan how much you love this show.
Well, thank you. May we all be the 5-star review giver that we wish to see in this world.
Exactly.
Goodbye.
Bye.